Today's shiur begins 5 lines from the top of Daf Yud Zayin. You will notice a Mishnah. Before we begin the actual Gemara text, we look at the side under the Nosei, the topic heading, one of the special features of Gemara markings, the Shas Ozer. We have written on the side, Yesh Neder Toch Neder, V'ein Shavua B'soch Shavua. In this case, our topic heading is basically a citation of the opening of the Mishnah. These terms that a neder can be superimposed on an existing neder as opposed to a shvua will be discussed in the Mishnah and of course the Gemara that follows. Now the Mishnah. Yesh neder b'soch neder. Meaning, after someone vowed and he then takes a similar vow on the same topic, the same item, the second vow takes hold. V'ein shvua b'soch shvua. Not so in the case of a second oath superimposed on a first oath. Ketzad. How do we illustrate this? Omar hareini nozir im ochal. Hareini nozir im ochal. He accepts upon himself the status of nozir. Nozir is one who refrains from grape products and other halachas that apply. He's called a Nazir, and he accepts on himself Nazirus conditional upon his eating, so that if he eats, he will become a Nazir, and he repeats that twice. V'ochal, and he then goes ahead and eats. Chayov al kol achas v'achas. He then has obligated himself to observe 2 Nazirus periods. Shvua shelo ochal v'ochal. If a person swore that he's not going to eat, and he repeats that, and then he goes ahead and eats, eino chayav elo achas. He'll be responsible for bringing a sacrifice that one who violates a shvua is obligated to bring only for 1 shvua violation. Omar Rav Huna. Lo shanu elo the Omar. Lo shanu, Rav Huna comes to qualify that which we say that there is a neder b'soch neder applies only under the following circumstances. Maybe before we continue with the Gemara itself, we should look at the side. We have a nosei topic heading and also an indication that this is a long topic. It lasts till Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph. In other words, the balance of today's shiur will center around this. And not only this, you'll see it will center around Rav Huna's opinion. Ha'omer hareini nozir hayom, hareini nozir hayom. We've written on the side that one who says that, he accepts upon himself Naziriteship today. And he repeats that. Rav Huna says, Ein cholo nazirus al nazirus. The second nazirus does not take hold. Ushmuel says nazirus cholo al nazirus, that the second Nazirus does take hold. When we speak about a second Nazirus taking hold, that could manifest itself in different ways, halachically speaking, but for our purposes, we're just going to recognize that the second statement has meaning. Exactly how that's manifest, we'll leave that aside for now. We see that a machlokus between Rav Huna and Shmuel regarding someone who simply repeats a vow, in this case the vow being Naziriteship. Structurally, under the Mivneh heading, you see an indication that this structure will continue till Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph. Triangles that appear are challenges, or kushos al Rav Huna. We're going to be challenging Rav Huna, and as we said, this will continue till Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph. Now the Gemara text. Omar Rav Huna, Lo shanu elo de Omar hareini nozir hayom, hareini nozir lemochar. The Mishnah is teaching that yesh neder b'soch neder. This applies only if he says, I'm a nozir today and I'll be a nozir tomorrow. The migu de ka misvasef yoimo yesera. That since there is a reference to an extra day, an additional day, chaylo nazirus al nazirus. That enables a second nazirus period to set in upon the first Nazirus period. We take a look at the Rashi. Elo di Omar, the Migu disvasef yomi yisera, a Nazirus Rishona, that since an additional day applies or is now found beyond the first Nazirus period, we should point out, Rashi is going to say it in a minute, that a Nazirus period, unless otherwise qualified, is a 30-day abstention from wine products, grape products. The Chiomar Hareini Nozir Hayom Kivolov Naziru Shlofshim. When a person says, I'm a Nozir today, that means that today I'm accepting upon myself Naziriteship. That's a 30-day period of abstention. V'chihodar v'omar Hareini Nozir L'mochar. When he then repeats, when he utters the second statement, I'll be a Nozir tomorrow, mashma Hareini Nozir Shloishim Yoim V'echad. That implies I'll be a Nozir for 30 days. That's what was meant by the Hareini Nozir Hayom. And then by saying L'mochar, it's an additional day. V'echad. V'ein Nazirus Liyom Echad. There isn't such a thing as Nazirus for one day. Hilko Chal Nazirus al Nazirus V'havi Nozir Shloishim Achirim. And as a result of that, he'll have to observe two successive periods of 30 days Naziriteship. Well, you'll see then, it would then be a total of 60 days, two separate Nazirus installments. We continue in the Gemara. Avol, Omar Hareini Nozir Hayoim, Hareini Nozir Hayoim. Rav Huna says that if you simply copy or repeat the same thing twice, Ein Chola Nazirus al Nazirus. The second Nazirus does not take hold. In other words, there's no innovation, there's no newness to the second statement. So nothing takes hold. Ushmuel Omar Afilo Omar Hareini Nozir Hayoim, Hareini Nozir Hayoim, Chola Nazirus Oleh. According to Shmuel, even if he simply repeats the vow, the Nozir vow, in the same fashion as he stated it initially, the second Nazirus takes hold. In the spirit of the Mishnah, as we saw, Yesh Neder B'soch Neder. The Gemara asks, and we start a question, you can see that we've marked it as a long question. Ula Rav Huna, according to Rav Huna's understanding, Adetona in Ein Shvua B'soch Shvua, instead of teaching that a second shvua doesn't take hold or is not superimposed on a first shvua, listening, why not state a Tanaic source as follows? In other words, stay within the realm of Nedarim, Nazirus being a form of Neder, a type of vow, make a distinction within the same topic. Why does the Mishnah go from one topic to another in order to note a distinction? Listening, and we have a frame around this section. The reason it's dashed is because it's not an actual source, it's a suggestion for the Tanaic source. Suggested Mishnah. According to Rav Huna, the following should have been taught. Yesh neder b'soch neder, v'ein neder b'soch neder. There are cases where a second neder is superimposed on the first one, and sometimes not. Hareini nozir hayom, hareini nozir l'mochar, yesh neder b'soch neder. If he phrases it that way, the second Nazirus having the innovation or the nuance of an additional day, so the second Nazirus takes hold. Hareini Nozir Hayom, Hareini Nozir Hayom. However, if he repeats it literally, Ein Neder B'soch Neder, then we would say that a second Neder doesn't take hold. So instead of the Mishnah teaching that a second Shavuot doesn't take hold, why not stay within the realm of Nedarim in order to show the contrast? Kashya, this remains a difficulty. It's a technical difficulty as far as Rav Huna's Shita is concerned, but it's not the end, it's not a refutation of Rav Huna. Hence the Gemara goes on with another question. The note on the side under the Mivneh heading, we indicate that this marking scheme will continue till till the next Omid, that would be Yud Ches Omid Aleph. The double underline notes we've written on the side Hadgoshes Kashya, the highlighting of the difficulty. The term where the Gemara presents that this, whatever was said till that point, is a difficulty. You also see the use of a dashed underline, the kavasa, and you'll find that where the Gemara tries to contrast Shavuos with Nazirus and see if whatever point we were trying to develop is really legitimate. Tanan. Yesh neder besoch neder ve'ein shvua besoch shvua. This is, of course, a quote from our Mishnah. Heichi domi. What are the circumstances? In leima di omar hareini nozir hayoyim hareini nozir lemochar. That's as far as the example of a neder besoch neder. The kavasa gabi shvua, the parallel case by shvua would be, where there's a nuance in the second shvua. Shelo ochal shvua shelo ochal teinim v'chozer v'omar shvua shelo ochal anovim. Where he swears, his first oath is he's not going to consume figs, and the second, he's not going to consume grapes. In other words, he said something in the second oath that wasn't present in the first oath. Well, amai lo chalo shvua al shvua. Why does the second shvua not take hold? It's something different. Why shouldn't the second vow, oath be binding? Elo heichi domi. So what must be the circumstance? Delo elo heichi domi delo chalo shvua al shvua. The Mishnah maintained that a second shvua doesn't take hold. So what must be the case? Kedon di omar shvua shelo ochal teinim, v'chozer v'omar shvua shelo ochal teinim, where he simply carbon copies. He doubles. He repeats whatever was in the first shvua. Well, then the kavasol gabi nazirus heichi domi, and the parallel case of nazirus would be the omar hareini nazir hayoim hareini nazir hayom, where he simply repeats what he said initially, v'kotani, and the Mishnah says yesh neder besoch neder. This very case of hareini nazir hayom, the second nazirus takes hold. Kashya l'Rav Huna. This is a problem, a difficulty for Rav Huna. Omar loch Rav Huna masnisen. The Omar, the Mishnah case of neder besoch neder. The second neder taking hold is the Omar. What did he say? Hareini nazir hayoim, hareini nazir lemochar. The kavasa gabi shvua, the parallel case of shvua that would not take hold. The Omar shelo ochal te'enim, the chozav Omar shvua shelo ochal te'enim ve'anovim. The lo chayla. Where the second shvua, notice there is, just like in the case of the Nazirus, there was a newness, i.e., the reference to lemochar. Here in the second shvua, there's newness, i.e., the reference to anovim, which had not been mentioned in the first shvua. And Rav Huna tells you that this is what the Mishnah means when it says ein shvua, stoch shvua, that the second shvua, the lo chayla, it does not take hold. The Gemara asks, and this is a long question, V'omar Rabba Shvua shelo ochal te'enim v'chozer v'omar Shvua shelo ochal te'enim ve'anovim. Rabba refers to this very case that Rav Huna answered, mentioned. V'ochal te'enim v'hifrish korban, and he ate te'enim. And that's a violation of his oath. And he sets aside, as a result of that, he's obligated to bring a sacrifice. V'chozar v'ochal anovim. And then he ate grapes without eating figs again. Just ate grapes. Haviluhu anovim chatzi shiur. The eating of the grapes represents only half a quantity. Meaning, in the oath that spoke about grapes also mentioned figs. So in eating just grapes, not grapes and figs, but eating just grapes, that is called a partial quantity, where it's an insufficient quantity for holding the person liable. V'ein mevi'in korban al chatzi shiur. Even though it's a wrong thing to do, to eat, to violate part of the oath, nevertheless, a sacrifice is not brought. Now, we have to elaborate. Why is a second sacrifice not brought in that case? Because he only ate grapes. Had he, after eating the initial figs and set aside a sacrifice, gone ahead and eaten figs and grapes, he would have to bring a second sacrifice. What do we therefore see here? Almo hecha diyoma shvua shelo yuchal teinim v'chozar v'yoma shvua shelo yuchal teinim v'anovim migu dechal shvua al anovim, since the second shvua takes hold because of the new element, the grapes, chaylo nami al teinim. That second shvua has power, sets in upon the figs as well. And very simply, after he swore not to eat figs, he swears again not to eat figs and grapes. The second shvua takes hold. What did Rav Huna say about that case? In that very case, Rav Huna said the second shvua does not take hold. The Gemara explains, Rav Huna lo svira le karabba. Rav Huna simply doesn't accept Rabba. Rabba and Rav Huna were both Amoroyim. So though Rabba says that Shvua shelo yichal teinim, and then Shvua shelo yichal teinim v'anovim, the second Shvua takes hold, Rav Huna disagrees. The second Shvua does not take hold. Meisvei. Again, we challenge Rav Huna. Rav Huna said that one who says Hareini Nazir Hayom, the second Nazirus does not take hold. The question that is presented here, you'll notice, is a long question taking us to the top of Yud Ches Amar Aleph. Meisvei Misha Nozar Shtei Nazirus Mono Es Harishon V'Hifrish Korban. A person who had accepted two Nazirus periods. Mono means he counted, he observed the first one, set aside a sacrifice. At the termination or the culmination of the Nazir period, a Nazir brings 3 sacrifices. So here's a fellow that observed the Nazirus period. He initially accepted 2 Nazirus periods. He set aside his sacrifices, set aside but not offered them yet. V'nishal oleh, and then absolved or rescinded the Nazirus period. That's accomplished by going to a Torah scholar and explaining that he regrets having accepted the Nazirus. Also lo ishniya borishona. The second Nazirus period takes over the vacuum left by the absolved first Nazirus period, and he'll bring the sacrifices for the second Nazirus period, and he's considered as having observed that second Nazirus. The double starred note that you see refers to a girsa that's in Masechah Shavuos, which reads, after it says here, V'hifrish korban, the Gemara there reads, V'hifrish oleh korban, V'achar kach nishal al rishona. Essentially, the way we explained things here. But it's just important to note the detailed lashon of the Gemara that has ramifications for a point that we make in our Mark Gemaras in the previous Rashi. But for our purposes, we want to understand what actually took place with this fellow who had been nozer shtei nazirus. Heichi dami. In leimod yomar hareini nazir hayoyim hareini nazir lemochar. Amai also loy shniya borishona. How is it that it could be said that the second nazirus fills the void left by the absolved first Nazirus. Ha'iko yoyma yisera. There's an extra day. The first Nazirus was accepted from day 1. The second Nazirus made reference to as becoming a Nazir the next day, l'mochar. There's an extra day involved. So it can't be said that the first the void left by the first Nazirus is now filled by the second Nazirus. If we look in the Rashi, he spells out the details. Ha'iko yoyma yisera. Rashi says, "Dareini nazir l'mochar dekomar also yom the Nazirus shnia." The phrase or the vow of "I'll be a Nazir tomorrow" that he said on that day, "Eino chal elo liachar shloishim." It takes hold only after 30 days. Dahainu liachar Nazirus rishona. It will take hold only after the first Nazirus. V'mai also lo shnia barishona v'niftar min Nazirus shnia kedem shiyovo yoim shloishim ve'echad. How is it that before the arrival of day 31, now this fellow observed 30 days, and we're told in the source that at that point he could bring the korbanos that he had set aside, and they would count for the second Nazirus. But why should that be? How can he think to bring korbanos before the arrival of day 31? His initial acceptance of Nazirus, after he said Hareini Nazir Hayom, he also said Hareini Nazir L'mochar, and that L'mochar would take you to day 31. Dahainu L'mochar. So that can't be the case. So we go back to the Gemara text. Let's read that line again. Amai also lo shnia barishona ha'iko yoma yisera. Is there not the extra day? Elo pshita the omar. The case must be the case which this Tanaic source describes, namely that the second Nazirus fills the void in an exact fashion. It fills the void of the first Nazirus. It must be the omar hareini nazir hayoim, hareini nazir hayom. We continue at the top of Yud Ches Amud Aleph, Utyufta de Ravuna. This is a refutation of Ravuna. How is that? So if we look in the Rashi at the top of Yud Ches, Rashi says, Utyufta de Ravuna de Midikatani, also lo ishnia barishona, from the fact that this source says that the second Nazirus fills the void left by the absolved first Nazirus, Mechlal de Nazir shnia nami chaylolei. It shows that second Nazirus really did take hold. According to Ravuna, if you carbon copy the second Nazirus repeating exactly what you said of the first Nazirus, nothing takes hold. You see here that there is the presence of the second Nazirus. The Gemara says, that the case the Tanaic source is referring to is what Ravuna originally contended, that after saying Hareini Nazir Hayom, he said Hareini Nazir L'mochar. Umay also lo. And what did the Tanaic source mean when it said that the second one fills the void of the first one? Labar me'ahu yoyma yisera. That's with the exception of the extra day. So that in that case, after having absolved himself of the first Nazirus period and those sacrifices are waiting there, he's not going to bring the sacrifices on that day. He'll have to observe another day of Nazirus and then bring the sacrifices. But as far as an entire extra Nazirus period needing to be observed, that he won't have to do. Inami, another resolution, as far as the Tanaic source is concerned, is that where it said he was Nazir Shtei Nazirus, Kigon Shekibel Shtei Nazirus Bevasachas, meaning his initial statement was, I'm accepting on myself 2 Nazirus periods. But if he said Hareini Nazir Hayom, if he spelled it out, Hareini Nazir Hayom, Hareini Nazir Hayom, the second Nazirus will not take hold. Mosiv Rav Hamnuna. Again, a challenge to Rav Huna, and it's a long question. The pasuk says Nazir lahazir. Mikan, from this we learn Shanazirus chal al hanazirus, that a second Nazirus can be superimposed on a first Nazirus. Sheachol, without the verse, I would have thought Valo Dinhu, I would have thought that through logic, a second Nazirus is not Chal on a first Nazirus. And what's the logic that would have led me to say that? Uma Shvua Chamura. Mind you, an oath which is considered of great stringency. Ein Shvua Chala al Shvua. A second Shvua is not superimposed, doesn't take hold upon an existing Shvua. Nazirus Kala Lo Kol Shekain, Nazirus which is lighter, all the more so that the second Nazirus wouldn't be Chal Talmud Lomar. Therefore the pasuk comes to dispel the logic and says, Nazir Lahazir, Mikan Shanazirus Chala al Hanazirus. From here we see that a second Nazirus period sets in upon a first Nazirus. Hechidomi, what are the circumstances? Ilemo v'omar hareini nazir hayoim hareini nazir lemochar. Do I need a pasuk? Do I need nazir lahazir to tell me that the second Nazirus will take hold? That is obvious. There's newness, there's a new element to the second Nazirus. And therefore, of course, the second Nazirus will take hold. Elolav, the Omar, Hareini Nazir, Hayom. Hareini Nazir, Hayom. He repeats what he said initially, V'kotoni Nazirus Chal al Nazirus. And it says in the source, based on the pasuk, that the second Nazirus takes hold. And that is a problem for Rav Huna. Look, no problem. What is the source referring to? Kagon shekiblo of shtei nazirus bevasachas. We saw this explanation earlier, where he says, I accept upon myself 2 Nazirus periods. In such a case, the second Nazirus will be chal. But it's not a function of 2 separate vows. It's all contained within the first statement of his, within the only statement of his, and therefore both take hold. So at this point in the Gemara, you can see we had a number of questions raised against Rav Huna, but he successfully defended himself from all of the questions. Now, a point was mentioned above in the Tanaic source. There's an arrow that you can use on the side of the Gemara text. It was mentioned that Shavuos have an element of stringency that you don't find by Nedarim. Umay chumra deshvua mi neder. What is that stringency that you find by Shavuos that would have led me, if I followed the logical approach, to say that, mind you, by Shavuos, ain shvua chal shvua, then all the more so by Nedarim. So the Gemara seeks to find out what is the basis of that chumrah. If you'll say that Shavuos has an element of stringency that you don't find by Nedarim, in that Shavuos set upon or are effective even concerning things that are not tangible, things like actions. That's Dover Shein Bo Mamish. And we know that a shvua can be made and takes hold regarding something like an action, not so a neder. Yeah, but on the other hand, neder nami chomur, a neder, the realm of vows, has a stringency that you don't find by shvuas. Shekain chal al hamitzvah kerishus. If a person, let us say, he swears, he takes an oath not to makayim, not to fulfill a particular mitzvah, the shvua does not take hold. But if he makes a neder, the result of which would be his non-fulfillment of the mitzvah, that neder is binding. So what is the chumrah, the uniqueness of shvuas that makes it such that we call it a chomor more than nedarim? Elo mishum dechsiv bo b'shvu, because regarding shvuas it says lo yinakeh, which translated means that for someone who violates or who takes false oaths, there is no atonement for it. He cannot be cleansed. He's stained, permanently stained. That is true with regard to shvuas. Not so, that pasuk is not found in the context of Nedarim. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.